A picture is worth 1,000 words, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you might miss some of the meaning. Our guest tonight is Stuart Oring. He's the author of Understanding Pictures, Theories, Exercises, and Procedures. And during this two-part series, Mr. Oring will teach us the different ways to look at and interpret photographs. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.
Well, thank you.
Now, the whole premise of your book is that it's not enough to glance at a photograph and get some sort of a meaning from it, correct? There are a lot of different levels that are at work. Can you just explain that a little bit?
Well, there are a lot of ways to look at a picture. You can look at it very quickly and understand something about it, but perhaps very little. And if you look at it again over a period of time, you may understand more. Or you can look at it and really investigate it and put some effort into it, and you will derive a lot more out of the photograph. There are a lot of questions that you need to ask yourself about pictures, and there are different ways to approach a picture, different procedures. These are things that I've explained in the book, and there are certain preparatory exercises that you can develop the ability to understand pictures with. For example, you can become more aware of your surroundings or more perceptive of things around you by certain exercises that I've explained in the book.
How aware are people generally? We were talking before the show, and you say that people are not very in tune with pictures, that they tend to deal on other levels other than sight and the visual.
People respond to their environment in different ways. Some are visually oriented, but some respond to sound and some respond kinesthetically. Most people are not aware of pictures. They understand words and verbal languages, but they don't understand the visual language. Most schools don't teach the language of vision to young students. There may be some training in certain specialized high schools, but there's very little training in understanding visuals. So as a result, people don't understand pictures. Millions of people paint pictures for recreation or take photographs for recreation, and they and the people who look at those pictures understand very little about them.
So what do you suggest people do when they go and they're looking at a photograph that they've never seen before? What are some of the techniques that you suggest they employ when looking at that photo?
Well, the first thing to do is to look at a picture and try to understand and observe everything that's in it, all the details, the subject, the action the subject is doing, the object that's receiving the action, the environment, the subject and the object are in. But also what's very important is to learn to understand the language of symbols. In the art field, they talk about symbols such as lines, shapes, colors. This is only one small aspect of understanding a picture. These design motifs are only one small part of it. There are ways to approach a picture so that you learn to understand what the object suggests to you, what the image suggests to you, what the tone suggests, what the lighting suggests, the symbols within the picture, what they mean to you. And this takes some time. You have to contemplate the picture over a period of time, trying to understand it. For instance, just the light tones might suggest something entirely different than the middle tones or the dark tones. And you get impressions from these things that have certain suggestions to you.
Darker tones meaning a more gloomy...
Dark tones may mean gloominess. Light tones may mean an ethereal, light, happy quality. Middle tones might suggest reality. Distant space might suggest that something is very remote, a certain feeling of remoteness. Close space might suggest intimacy. So these are things that you can learn, but it's going to take some time and effort to learn them.
Now, one symbol that we have a photograph, actually now, if we can roll that tape, the photographer used light, or rather reflection, to actually create a symbol. Can you tell us a little bit about that portrait? I believe we have it up now.
Yes, if you look at the photograph on your monitor or on your television, there's a photograph of Edward Stuyvesant of J. Pierpont Morgan, the famous banker. Most people who look at the photograph will see the image of the person, they'll see the portrait. If they look more closely, they might notice that in the lower left-hand corner of the photograph is a glint of light that looks like a knife. And this light acts as a symbol of a knife, which suggests the ruthlessness of the person.
And the picture is also very dark.
Yes, and this helps contribute to that effect too.
Now, how pivotal is the understanding of symbolism to the understanding of a picture? If you really don't have a firm grasp on symbols, is it difficult to truly understand a picture, and can you learn how to pick up symbolism? Or is that something you sort of had to pick up as you grew up?
You can learn symbolism. It's not very different than learning to read and understand your dreams. Dreams and photographs are very similar in the respect that they do use symbols that can communicate to us. In a dream, something within you communicates to you by means of symbols. In a photograph or a work of art, the artist is trying to communicate to you through symbols. And these symbols will have to have a universal meaning or some kind of meaning to you, or you'll miss it. There are different levels of symbolism. Some symbols are very simple to understand. You might understand that darkness suggests gloominess. That's not too difficult. Other symbols are a little more difficult. But you can develop this ability, and there are books that help explain symbols, not the average book on how to interpret dreams. A lot of those are very superficial, but there are some encyclopedias of symbols, and there are some very good books on dream symbolisms. One of them is by a man named Stephen Kaplan called Dream Work, Jungian Sonoy Dream Work, where he took the ideas of Jung and dream analysis and applies them and describes them in a book, and some of these principles can be used to better understand pictures.
Okay, well, we're going to take a break right now, but when we come back, we'll talk about some of the other things that people should hone in on when they're looking at a picture. So please stay with us. Okay, so
I turn rather quickly.
Welcome back to A Different Look. We're learning how to interpret and understand pictures with our guest, Stuart Oring. Now, before we took our break, we were talking about some of the things to look for when you first approach that picture to better understand. You mentioned light, you mentioned symbolism. What are some of the other things that people should immediately look for?
Well, when you're looking at a picture, it's helpful if you think of the picture as to what kind of picture it is that you're looking at, because each picture has to be approached differently. It might be a documentary picture that is a bridge to some experience or shows how things look at a particular place at time, what a certain marriage custom might have been, what happened during the Depression. These are documentary pictures. They usually don't depend too much on symbolism so much as showing you what things look like. They're very realistic pictures. Sometimes news pictures come to mind. These are of this type. Another type of picture that's quite important and more difficult to understand is a picture that expresses some feeling of the photographer. Either a feeling of how he feels inside, his inner feelings, or what he thinks about the subject. He may photograph something to show what its nature is, what a cat is like, or what an object's essence is, what is the essential quality of that object. Or he may photograph it and project his feelings about how he feels about a person. In that photograph that you saw earlier, Steichen showed you his feelings about Morgan, that he felt Morgan was a very aggressive, maybe domineering type person, brutal type of person, by the symbol of the dagger, which most people would miss if they weren't aware of symbolism. So there are these different types of pictures. Or a picture could be purely abstract, where you can't recognize the subject matter at all, but it expresses some feeling that the photographer felt and he was trying to express through symbols that suggest that feeling.
Now, emotion is very important when looking at a photo and trying to understand it. It gives you your own emotional reaction, can give you insights into what the picture is all about. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. And the only way to understand your emotional feelings toward a picture is to try to respond to this and feel how you do respond to the picture. Just looking at it for a period of time and trying to understand how you feel about it or contemplating that picture can put you in touch with your emotions. You can help this by trying to understand what it suggests, but also what the different tones suggest. What do the light tones suggest? What do the dark tones suggest? What do the middle tones suggest? What does the lighting suggest? The space? I've described these in my book, Understanding Pictures, all of the concepts that help you to better understand a picture. And also, I've explained a whole system of exercises that will help you become more aware.
And we'll be getting into those exercises in the second show. But one thing that I wanted to get out here in this first episode is having an open mind. That's very important. We were talking before the show about certain people bring certain baggage, certain experiences with them when they view a photo, and that can actually block the meaning of the photo. If someone has a strong belief system and they look at a photo and they don't want to see something, even though it might be in the photo, they might just not see it?
Yeah, some people have a problem understanding pictures because they don't like that type of picture. They set up a block, or they may have certain very strong beliefs that keep them from understanding certain types of pictures and enable them to understand another type of picture. Someone that enjoys one type of picture, say design-oriented pictures, a lot of advertising photography is mainly design-oriented. The person that did the picture is a person that thinks in terms of formal design. That type of person may have trouble relating to some other type of picture. So you have to be open-minded when you look at pictures and be willing to accept the picture for its nature and what it can offer you.
What about the area between the objects in a picture? Now, you can tell a lot about a picture from the spacing.
Well, there's a thing called negative space. This is the area between objects. A good photographer or a good artist is very aware of space between objects and what this area might suggest in the picture. Sometimes it suggests certain things and certain feelings that help contribute to the feeling of the picture. It can absolutely ruin a picture, or it can make a picture, so you do have to be aware of that.
Now, what if you have absolutely no idea? You are looking at a picture, say, for example, it's an abstract picture, and you have no idea what the picture is trying to convey. What would you say to people to get the thought process moving? What should they do?
I would try to understand what it suggests to them as a symbol. You have to look at that as a symbol. It's going to symbolize some feeling or something. It could be an archetypal symbol, a universal type of symbol, or it could be some personal symbol. But how do you relate to it? What does it suggest to you? Does it suggest a space monster, or does it suggest a knife like the photograph of Steichens?
So keep looking at it and keep thinking about it.
Look at it and keep thinking about it and try to see what it suggests to you, and realize that it is going to express a feeling. It's not going to show reality. It's going to be some inner feeling.
Okay, well, we are out of time in this program. Now, next week we are going to come back. You're going to give us specific exercises. We're going to actually look at some photographs and learn how to read and interpret them. So please tune in next week. Good night. Coming up next on A Different Look, we continue our series on understanding pictures. During tonight's show, our guest Stuart Oring will show us some photographs and teach us how to read and interpret them. Welcome to A Different Look. I'm Megan McGrath. Like classical art forms, modern photography is a medium rich in symbolism and meaning. But simply looking at a picture isn't enough. To fully understand the image, the viewer must learn to read the photograph as they would a book. And here to teach us how to read is Stuart Oring, author of Understanding Pictures. Thank you very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Now, you were on our program last week, and you explained what your book was about and the concept behind reading pictures. Could you just briefly summarize that for people who perhaps weren't watching the show last week?
Well, last week we got into the idea that if you simply look at a picture quickly, you're only going to get a certain amount out of it. And that if you look at a picture over a period of time, you might get a little more out of it. But there are other things that you can do, like trying to understand the symbolism in pictures and what the space may mean, or lighting, and so on. In my book, I've developed a whole system for looking at pictures and approaching pictures things that you can do to help develop the ability in yourself to look at pictures, like developing awareness and so on. One of the things that you can do is to be very aware of what's in a picture and looking at the picture for details, what the subject is, what action takes place, what feelings you get out of the picture, and so on. This is a beginning. A little later we're going to take some pictures and put them before you and describe some of the things that you might look for while you're looking at pictures.
Now, one of the things that you tell people to do is to ask themselves a series of questions. That you look at the photograph and you ask yourself a series of questions, and that helps you figure out exactly what the action is in the photo.
Yes, because if you just look at the picture, you'll overlook a lot of things that you should do to help you understand it. And if you do put down what I call a checklist and fill this in with details that I've developed from a lot of disciplines, primarily photography. Some of it comes from outstanding photography teachers that I've had from the art field. You'll be less likely to overlook things, and it'll help you get an idea of what you really are looking at.
Well, let's get into some of the pictures right now. I believe the first example we have is of a documentary style photograph. We have some tape of that. There it is. Can you just tell us a little bit about what should we be doing when we look at this photograph?
All right, a documentary photograph is a type of photograph that shows you a person, place, or thing. It's a bridge to some kind of an experience. But still there are things that you can note about the photograph that will help you understand it better. For instance, in my checklist system, you can actively study this photograph by asking yourself, what do you see in the photograph? There's a Greek-like vase statue on a pedestal, small statues, a formal garden, a stone wall, a small stone building. Then you might ask, what is the subject of the photograph? Well, the main subject is the photograph in the foreground. What action takes place? Well, way in the background, two people are walking in the distance, and a place receives some visitors. Now, if you describe the setting where the action takes place, it's a formal garden. Now, list the symbols that you see. Most people won't think in terms of the symbols, but in this picture there are some. There's a statue, a garden, and a surrounding wall. The statue could suggest frozen time. The garden could suggest a tranquil area. The surrounding wall, a wall could suggest isolation. So they suggest an isolated, tranquil area, seemingly frozen in time, where time seems to stand still. If you continue along this way, analyzing what the photograph has in it and what kind of influence the photographer had on the subject, it will help you to understand it. But there are other things that are important in understanding pictures as well, like what you feel about the picture. One of the questions you should ask yourself is, what does the image suggest to you? Does it have human or animal-like shapes or qualities? Well, this photograph shows the presence of man in very subtle ways. It shows a man-made wall, a man-made statue, formal gardens, blurred human figures. So it shows the presence of man. That's one of the things that you might derive from the photograph. What feelings do you get from the image? Lighting suggests that it's a three-dimensional place because the lighting is three-dimensional. Tone suggests reality along with some mystery. And if you ask yourself what impressions you get from it, man has imposed himself. The statue appears out of place. So man has created a place that isn't quite right by imposing himself. Now, there are other things you can do. You can sketch. You can ask yourself what the light, middle, and dark areas suggest. And if you do, you'll find that everything doesn't stand revealed and what the essence of the subject might suggest to you. In my book, I go through many more questions, but that's basically what you have to be concerned with.
And we need to take a break right now, but when we come back, we're going to, what is the second picture is sort of a creative...
It's a creative, realistic picture where you can tell what the people are, that there are objects in the picture, you can tell what they are, but it's not quite clear what the picture means.
Okay, and we will analyze that when we come back. Please stay with us. Welcome back. Stuart Oring is teaching us how to read pictures. Now, our second example is a creative type picture. I believe we have some footage of it. It has a man and a woman, another black and white photo.
The second photograph that you will be seeing will show a man and a woman. It's a photograph that I call creative but realistic. You can make out what the subject matter is, but it's a creative photograph that just doesn't show a place or a person as it is, literally. It has some feeling involved. In this case, it's the feeling of the photographer. The photographer is trying to express some inner feeling of himself in the picture. So again, you can ask yourself what you see, and here you see a blurred image of a tall young lady, and the lady is exiting an area that suggests a fun house, and a short, guide-like man is watching her. The lady is the subject of the photograph, and she's walking away from a fantasy-like area. There seems to be a guide-like person present. There are large blurred cards, several face-like shapes, different abstract shapes, and therefore there are symbols and possible associations that you might see in the photograph. For instance, the winking, round, clown-like face off on the upper right background could suggest unreality. The greater-than-life-sized cards in the background might suggest unreality also. The blurred face of the girl and man is movement towards reality, and the expression on the girl is kind of an emotional situation. Now, she's leaving a fenced area, which could mean demarcation or separation. A fence could be a separation area, and a guide-like man could suggest a need for guidance. Now, if you ask yourself what the image suggests to you, it could suggest the world of the imagination. It has human-like shapes and qualities, but it's a theater-like make-believe area, and the lighting suggests this, kind of a theater-like make-believe feeling. The tonality is one of mystery. The space makes you feel reality, but there's an unreality about the image. So if you think about the photograph for a while and contemplate it, you get a feeling of unreality, fantasy, and ghost-like images, and perhaps the need for some kind of guide present in the form of a young person.
So the young woman is in need of guidance, and that is her guide assisting her there?
Well, that's one feeling that you could get out of this, and that there is a certain area where there was guidance, and now she's leaving that area of guidance. She's exiting the area beyond the fence, and she's leaving the guide. So there was this guidance or need for guidance, and now she's leaving that area.
So she's going to be a little bit more independent, perhaps?
Right, and a little bit better off for the guidance. What was the photographer trying to say? This is what you might ask yourself, and if you've gone through this preliminary questioning, then you might come up with something like, when life is fantasy-like and painful, fantasy-like being the surroundings, we may need guidance.
Okay. And we have a third picture, which should prepare the audience. This is an abstract picture, and I believe we have footage of that. There we go. Now, what exactly? This is one of those photos that I was talking about on the first show. You look at it and you have no idea what it is. An abstract photo by one of your friends, is that correct?
Yes, it's the same photographer that took the other pictures. It's an abstract photograph. The subject matter is unreal. There's no idea of what it actually is in reality. It's created under the enlarger by a very old process called cliché-vert. If you ask yourself what you see in the photograph, you might answer the cutaway of a double embryo in a sac-like container, the upper and lower parts suggesting a double embryo. What action takes place? Well, when I analyzed the photograph, I got the feeling of creation, becoming, or the formation of highly advanced embryonic life forms from those embryo-like creatures. Describe the setting. It's a dark, unclear area from which embryonic life forms seem to emerge. The symbols suggest an advanced embryonic structure. Well, what does this symbolize? It could suggest creative beginnings, creative potential. Embryo meaning the beginnings of life or the beginnings of some kind of potential in life. So that's the association I get from that photograph, that it suggests creative beginnings or creative potential. And if you ask how do these symbols or metaphors influence the content of the photograph, they suggest unusual and highly advanced life forms that are in a state of early embryonic development.
Is it possible for someone to ever get the full meaning or the exact meaning, the meaning that the photographer intended, without knowing anything about the photographer, what he was thinking with an abstract photo like that?
Well, part of the problem with any image is that the photographer or artist may not knowingly intend anything. He may have a need to express himself. He may try to express some inner feelings and not know exactly what it is he's expressing in the photograph because of some need or urgency that he feels. What happens in creative art and creative photography is that, if it's not a documentary picture, is that some idea or feeling, I call it an idea feeling, exists, and the photographer may not be aware of this, but it's something that he wants to express, and it might be unconscious. It might have gone into his unconscious mind. But then along comes some kind of stimulus, some kind of thing like a mental atmosphere he's surrounded with. He might be affected by some kind of thing in his environment or his psychic state that makes him want to create. So either he deliberately uses certain symbols and creates a picture and makes a photograph like the embryo, or he may recognize something and instantly photograph it because it excites him, but it excites him because of this need that he feels.
Well, unfortunately, we are out of time, but I'd like to thank you very much for joining us and doing this two-part series with us.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
And good luck with your book.
Thanks.
And I hope some of you got something out of this and can better read pictures. Thank you very much for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Good night.